Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good day. And I say that because we have an international community thanks to Zoom. My name is Herben. I'm an alcoholic. Some of you are not in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're in another 12-step program. And some of you may not even be in a 12-step program. The subject today is forgiveness, which is a broad human process that just requires some consciousness, some courage, and some help from other people to navigate the path. And that's what we'll do today. For the first hour, I will share with you my thoughts about the path that I navigated to bring me to an experience of forgiveness and then an awareness as to what that process was. It was really the reverse of logic and common sense. Normally, you get to know something and then you get to do something. My process was I got to do something and then to know something, just the reverse. Both ways are effective, both ways are human, not one better than the other, and you'll find that you'll experience both. I mentioned companionship. My experience of forgiveness and my knowledge of forgiveness was given to me through this step process, but it was confirmed when I read a book by Fred Luskin, Luskin. He's a PhD, doctor of clinical psychology, receiving his doctorate from Stanford University back probably 30, 40 years ago. And he did his doctoral dissertation on forgiveness from a scientific standpoint, from a secular standpoint. That's words he uses in contrast to my experience, which is spiritual. It's a nice contrast, a summary. The spiritual versus the secular. We were asked to be on a panel some 30 years ago after he published his book, Forgive for Good. That's the basic textbook that I would refer you to. Forgive for Good. He took his doctoral dissertation and modified it so that it would be a book that non-scientists could read, non-psychologists could read, made it approachable for the average person. We were asked to do a panel together. I didn't know him, never met him. So I read his book, and what I saw in there, and I mentioned it to him after the panel, the process of forgiveness is the same. The dynamic is the same between the spiritual and the secular. The vocabulary is different. Perhaps some of the methodology is different. But underneath, as you hear me say many, many, many times, the truth and the reality of it is the same. Because we're human beings coming at it from different approaches, different perspectives, different experiences, and different vocabulary. But the dynamic is the same. And you'll see that today, I believe. And you've probably seen it before. And you will hear some redundancy between myself and Dr. Luskin, because there's only so much information and so much experience that we have. But my experience is you can't hear it enough. You can't be exposed to it enough because every time I hear it, every time I read it, every time I think about it, every time I approach it, I have a different nuance and a different experience. Today, I've entitled it Freedom Through Forgiveness. Freedom. Freedom from the clutches of this emotion that we have, however you name the emotion. Mostly my experience was resentment, but it could be fear, and it could be shame, and it could be many other feelings and or experiences. But what this offers is freedom, this process that we'll be talking about today. I'll speak for about an hour about my experience with the 12 steps that led me to having the experience. And then Dr. Luskin will come on in about an hour to talk about his research and his experience, both in the forgiveness of others and in self forgiveness. We did an entire workshop on self forgiveness over the past, and those workshops are on my YouTube channel. Both my presentations at the time on forgiveness, which are a variety of presentations with PowerPoints, as well as my time with Dr. Luskin, co-facilitating a workshop on forgiveness from a variety of perspectives. At the same time, he has a very robust YouTube channel and website. So there's lots of material here. And it is in your best interest to periodically plug into this material, whether it's the written material or the recording material. So that you can continue to understand it and absorb it at whatever level of consciousness and whatever level of need that you have. So the Mary and Joseph Retreat Center supports us in both the administration and the registration, and we really thank them for that. It's a retreat center that's geographically local to me. I've had a lot of experience and exposure to the retreat center, and they really support the 12-step community. Melissa is here as a representative. Melissa, would you come and introduce yourself and say a few words about the retreat center?
Sure. Hello, can you hear me? Well,
Yes, we can. Yes.
okay. Well, good day to all. For those who have not met me, I am part of the staff here at the Mary Joseph Retreat Center. Retreat Center was established in 1963 by the daughters of Mary and Joseph. We first started off as a couples retreat center, but now we welcome all walks of life. We are an 8-acre campus, and on our campus we have a labyrinth. It's a circular path used for meditation, and it's modeled after the Chartres Cathedral. So if you can't make it to France, but you can make it to Rancho Palos Verdes, please stop by. And also on our campus, we have the Heavenly Bound Bookstore, where we house many books and gifts. And 3 books that we do house is Herb's published books on spiritual awakening. So, as you know, Herb has 7 years of Claretian Seminary, 40 plus years in human resource certified spiritual director, over 40 years of active participation in a 12-step fellowship. So I'm sure there's more to add on to my bulleted list here. And thank you so much. And also, if you haven't heard, we are having a retreat with Herb in person with Joe B called Design for Living 2025. It's a 3-day spiritual retreat. and it goes from 6 p.m. on June 13th, and from it ends on Sunday, June 15th at 1:30 p.m. All meals are included. You could stay on campus either as a single occupancy, a shared occupancy, or as a commuter. That means usually commuters are people who either stay in the area and can actually drive to the retreat center, or maybe we're already fully booked and I haven't seen the room list yet. And then usually they'll stay, a few miles away at a local motel or hotel. So I saw someone message me. I haven't checked it yet, but I will let you know if there is still space availability. So come on down. We'd love to meet all of you in person.
Thanks, Melissa. And yes, there's probably space. We extended and took more rooms at this early time. And this is Joe from Australia, who has, in fact, recorded my work for the last almost 20 years and edited the work and created the YouTube channel. So she's been a big advocate, supporter of the work that I do. And now she's doing her own work, uh, facilitating workshops and co-facilitating with me on a quarterly basis or semi-annual basis. So thank you very much, Melissa, for
Okay.
all your support. Nan and Lisa, perhaps you could just introduce yourself as our administrators and make comment about the chat and anything else that you want to from an administrative standpoint.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nan, and I'm an alcoholic and a compulsive overeater. And welcome to the forgiveness workshop with Herb and Fred. Lisa and I are co-hosting today, and I really appreciate all the help that Lisa has given me. Just a few administrative announcements before we get started. Through most of the meeting today, the chat will be reserved for administrative use only. I'll open the chat near the end of the workshop today. If you have any questions or immediate administrative or technical issues, you can please send me a chat or Lisa a chat. Any slides that are used today will be made available to you. During the Q&A session, we'll be using spotlighting. So please do not pin yourself. You can raise your hand, and Herb will call on you in the order of your the hands raised. Keep an eye on the chat because Lisa and I will be putting things in there that have been mentioned or helpful information. If you're registered for this workshop, I will be sending out the slides that have been included and also previous workshop recordings. Okay, Lisa, I'm passing it over to you.
Well, I'm Lisa. I'm a student of the 12 steps, and I think Nan has covered it all. But again, if you guys have any questions or anything you want to know more about, just let us know in the chat. And do keep an eye on it. We do put stuff in there quite frequently, and sometimes we forget to look there. So keep an eye on the chat and enjoy the workshop.
Thanks, guys, for your support. Couldn't do this work without that. Just a couple other points. Fred Luskin also has another book, Forgive for Love, which is about forgiveness in relationships, equally as useful and helpful. His primary book, Forgive for Good, of course, is the textbook. And then he has a workbook on forgiveness that's coming out in March. So stay tuned. I'll send out a flyer when, in fact, it's available through Amazon or other outlets. It's a workbook on forgiveness. In my own way of life document, which is on my website, herbk.com, is a 3-page commentary, reflection, meditation, very distilled, very dense summary of the forgiveness process from a 12-step standpoint. And maybe Nan even has an independent copy of that because we've made efforts to have it available outside of the way of life document. But we'll take care of that later on. But you know that you can go to my website and download, and I recommend it, the Way of Life document. That's its name. It's about an 80-page document. And I really recommend it if you're going to be doing step work, because it has lots of explanations and lots of schemas, outlines, definitions, mechanisms to understand each of the steps, especially that forgiveness process. As I mentioned, a 3-page meditation on forgiveness. I was asked when I was going through the steps to look up the word forgiveness in a dictionary. My dictionary, at least in summary, said a decision to release. A decision to release them and a decision to be released is my experience now. Listen to the prayer of St. Francis. To the extent that we forgive them, we are forgiven. Listen to the Lord's Prayer 2,000 years earlier. To the extent that we release them from their debt, we are released. Now, these are statements that people like us, sitting around reflecting on their own experience, try to put into words. And the words have some meaning, but it's kind of superficial until you actually have the experience. But it was really helpful for me to understand my experience, when I heard the term decision to release, because it connects to step 3, doesn't it? Step 3, made a decision to turn. I conclude that sentence to turn from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. At the end of the 9th step on pages 84 and 85, Bill says, we enter the world of the spirit. Well, I ask myself, well, if at the end of the 9th step, I'm entering the world of the spirit, where have I been? Well, the answer is, as I look back over my shoulder, the world of self. Bill confirmed that in the beginning of the 3rd step instructions, page 62. Selfishness, self-centeredness is the root, and I'm as powerless over changing it, dealing effectively with it, as I am over my addiction. The end of the 2nd paragraph on page 62. I can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on my own power. I turn and am turned. I made a decision to turn, doing steps 4 through 9. And as I finished my 9th step, I became aware that that started the consciousness, and the action started when I did column 3 and column 4. Now, I didn't realize that the first time because I only had an experience and an understanding of column 4. 1988. The dates are not important other than to let you know that this is a process as I've experienced it. And it wasn't in order. It wasn't logical. It was almost backwards. 1988, I'm 5 years sober. This man took me through the steps and he revealed to me the power of column 4, that final instruction on page 67 with regard to the resentment inventory. There's no column 4. Don't look for it. Page 65 has 3 columns. Column 1, column 2, column 3. But this man used the terminology column 4 for that final instruction. On page 67, that paragraph that has 5 questions concerning our self-centeredness. And for the very first time, I was converted. I was transformed. I was turned from my self-centeredness of victimhood to my responsibility as perpetrator. Nothing changed except my attitude. Nothing changed except my view of my own history. And I saw that I don't have a part. I don't have a part in my resentment. Wow. When you start off like that, you get the attention in a meeting because everybody talks about your part, don't they? My part. There's no language like that in the big book. And the reality is, I don't have a part. I don't have a part in my resentment. I have it whole, the whole thing, 100%, because it's my reaction to people, circumstances, and events. It's not people, circumstances, and events coming at me. Bill says, turn it around, look at it from a different point of view. It's my perception, it's my attitude, it's my reaction, it's my action, 100%. Well, that's the beginning, that column 4, of an awakening that didn't get cemented until, in fact, 3 years later, 1991. The dates are not important, but the timing and the chronology is to at least reveal to you and witness to you that it's a process. Very slow, at least for me. I thaw out very slowly. I become more conscious very slowly. And this man, 3 years later, revealed to me column 3. And I was able to take a look at my beliefs. Column 4 showed me the truth about my motives. Embarrassing, but freeing. And then column 3 revealed to me my beliefs, which I saw as delusional. The shoulds that we have. Everyone has it. The myth of our story. We don't know it's a myth. We embrace our story. We cling to our story. It's the only reality that we have, but it's not reality. It's all made up. It's a lie. Column 3 revealed to me the lie, the delusion of my beliefs about I should, you should, they should, the world should. And that's one of the simple techniques that I recommend. You've heard me say it. If you want to know what your beliefs are, fill in the blank. I should. Fill in the blank. You should. Fill in the blank. Life should. Anytime you use the word should, you are revealing to yourself your belief. Now, it may be quite sound, quite healthy, quite solid. It may be. If you haven't done this work, it probably isn't. But it's a wonderful technique for you, if you think it or say it or feel it, should, to then challenge yourself to surface. What is it that I believe, and is it true? I mean, literally, objectively, scientifically, is it true? And how do I know that it's true? Not because I think it or feel it or expect it. That's all the myth. That's all the story. That's what we made up as our survival mechanism. All right. Preliminary comments. Let's take a look at forgiveness, the process as I've experienced it. But first, let's ask for spiritual intervention. We're asking the God of our not understanding, the power that we hope is available. We don't know it, we don't feel it, but we made a choice in step 2 that it is. It, capital I, is. Even though we don't know it, we don't feel it, we can't define it, we have no real adequate word for it, we have a faith choice 53, page 53. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? We are confronted with the question of faith. I'm quoting from the big book, not paraphrasing. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? We are confronted with the question of faith. For us, on a spiritual journey, meaning a relationship with the organismic life force, those are Dr. Berger's words, to try to help people who have a negative energy around the word God or spirit, organismic life force. What brings an acorn to be an oak tree? That's what we're talking about. That dynamic, that power, that mystery of life. What brings an acorn to be an oak tree? That's our life force that brings us from childhood to adulthood, especially if we have consciousness. And that's the total point of this process, is to have the consciousness to assume responsibility for our life. 100% to assume responsibility for our life. We talk a lot about emotional sobriety. That's the heart of it. Emotional sobriety is I take responsibility to manage my emotions and manage my behavior with consciousness, and with consciousness to correct mistakes that I make, to own them with courage and with humility. God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, the 12 steps to freedom, the process of forgiveness, and you. For an open mind and a new experience with myself, 12 steps to freedom, the process of forgiveness, and especially you. Essentially, it's a prayer for an open mind and open heart. I have the intention of being open, but I realize that I'm as powerless over affecting that intention as I am over my addiction. And I want to be open enough to be delivered to a place that I don't even know exists. It's not poetry. It's not just fancy words. This is actually my experience. Again, Dr. Berger says, be willing to be surprised. And that captures my experience. Embarrassed first, but then eventually surprised and pleased. Because I've seen the lie and I've accepted that it was a lie. And then I look for the truth and I'm delivered to the truth. The truth will set you free, but first it will embarrass you. This is that bondage of self that Bill talks about, pages 60 to 62. If you haven't looked at those 2 or 3 pages, as the description of unmanageability, highlighting it, making it personal and making it present tense, personal and present tense. I am having trouble with personal relationships, to quote the bedevilments on page 52, the behavioral description of unmanageability that then is described on pages 60 to 62 in terms of the underlying cause and condition. Page 62 concludes, selfishness, self-centeredness is the root. You see, addiction is not the problem. The big book is very clear. It's a symptom of the problem. The problem, Bill says it very clearly, is lack of power, page 45. As he enters into his suggested approach to step 2, we agnostics. The problem is lack of power. And this book, he says down a little further, and now I am paraphrasing. This book is about how to find power, a power other than ourselves. Listen to the ABCs on page 60, well, whatever. Let's see, page 60. At the end of the list of 12 steps, the ABCs. The B, No human power. Hello, not sponsor, not meetings, not therapist, not myself, not a step guide. No human power. I mean, that's the assumption. Those are the words. We need to find a power other than human power, whatever that means to us. It doesn't mean God in the traditional sense. God is not the power. God is the word that is inadequate to describe the power. So there are many different words in many different traditions, and all of them awkward and impotent to capture the reality of infinite. I can't help myself when I go deep into this because it's wonderful. The book says, God as I understand God. I really like and have been using in the last 5 years, God as I don't understand God. I'm 41 years sober next Friday. 41 years. I do not understand, and I know that I never will and can't because I'm finite. I have limits based on my materiality, my humanity. But I make a faith decision that there is this power, this energy, this force, this source. And I live as if it's all true. I don't know it, I don't feel it most of the time. But I live as if it's true. And when I look back over my shoulder, I still don't know that it's true, but my life is working, so I'm going to continue behaving and believing the way I do. Let's address forgiveness. Let's address the turning. Let's address awakening, enlightenment, transformation, the metamorphosis that is promised in this 12-step process. Currently, today, sitting there listening to me, I mean, you're a very special group. Who gives up a Saturday, a couple hours, and some money to register? Who does that? Other than people either who are suffering and don't know how to not suffer, or people who have tasted the truth and just want more, and that they know there is more. Are you continuing to blame anybody, even yourself? Hello. Do you blame yourself with regret and remorse? Bill addresses that in the resentment inventory, page 66. He gives us a prayer practice for the removal of deep resentments. And he says sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. A prayer practice, a prayer practice, a prayer practice. Oh, I'm as powerless to remove my deep resentments as I am over my addiction. No power at all. I need help. The same dynamic as in step 6 and 7. Willingness is step 6. Powerless is step 7. Do I see myself as a victim? I've heard it said, and I've experienced it in my groups, there's a culture of victimhood. It's not a conscious thing. It's not a manipulative thing in any conscious way. We've absorbed it to blame others, to blame circumstances, to blame society, to blame culture, to blame our family of origin. And there's lots of mischief. That's my cover word for all of that unfortunate experience that we've had. It's true, we had it. It's true, we've been betrayed. It's true that we've been handicapped. It's true. We've had trauma that actually changed our lives, our trajectory of our lives, and it's irredeemable. It's irreparable. It's true. It's true. But today it's not happening. Today it's not happening. It's merely a memory of what happened. Why am I holding on to it? Do I still hold them responsible for my current suffering? They are responsible for whatever happened back in the day. Could even be yesterday, but more than likely it's a year or a decade or many decades ago. It's not happening now. So you're in a 12-step program, I'm assuming the majority of you. And if you aren't, you might want to take a look at the big book and getting some help. I could not do it on my own, and I could not do it in one sitting. I went through this 12 steps 3 different times with 3 different step guides over a 12-year period. I'm not saying that that'll be your experience or that you need to have that experience. I'm just saying it's my experience. Steps 4 through 12, 4 through 9. Now I'm saying through 9. Have you finished all of your step 9 amends? Because if you haven't finished, some of you haven't even started, but if you haven't finished making your 9th step amends, then it's highly likely you haven't experienced the freedom and the promises on pages 83 and 84. Those promises are there because it's the experience of the original group, and it continues to be the experience of anybody who finishes the 9th step. As I mentioned earlier, that's the final phase of the forgiveness process, bringing healing to other people and being healed in that process, paradoxically. Then Bill says we commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. As we do step 9, we begin to practice 10, 11, and 12. I'm going to repeat that because many people don't understand the instruction in the big book, the instruction in the big book. We entered the world of the spirit. We commenced this way of living, commence meaning begin, way of living meaning 10, 11, and 12, as we cleaned up the past. Do you practice daily inventory? That's what step 10 is. Read the 12 and 12. Thank God he wrote his commentary 20 years after he got sober, 1953 approximately. He says it's a spiritual axiom. When I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. Now, because I did column 4, I could understand that and accept that. Before that, I didn't know what they were talking about. I would say, you haven't met my father, you haven't met my mother, you haven't met my bosses, you don't really understand my circumstances. But once I did column 4, I go, oh, yeah, there was mischief there. Absolutely. But it's now my reaction to the mischief that is the mischief. When I'm disturbed, it's me that's disturbing me by my reaction. Step 10, Bill defines so clearly in the 12 and 12 how it's used. It's not an inventory to do at night, and it's not an inventory to do in writing. Now, I don't care much about that as long as you're doing something, but let's really understand the purpose of the tool. During the day, being guided by a power other than ourselves based on natural principles When I'm disturbed, I'm in conflict with natural principles. And I'm powerless to be in alignment with natural principles, so I pray. Because I'm powerless, and I talk to somebody because I'm human, and eventually I try to think about who I can help. These are the 10-step formula. I think about who I can help, so that is the beginning of the turning from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. But there's two other steps that Bill includes in our way of life. We commenced our way of living as we cleaned up the past. Step 11. Well, what do you do in the morning? Do you sit in prayer and meditation, asking for guidance, even if it's a minute? There's no time frame in the big book. But he is suggesting that we ask God to direct our thinking, and we begin thinking. And this man said, and you listen to your thinking as the direct answer to the prayer. That was the key that unlocked the door to meditation for me. To listen. It's not in the big book. It's unfortunate, but it was the word that helped me have a daily practice of meditation. To listen to my thoughts, to listen to my feelings, to listen to my sensations, to listen to my memory, to listen to my imagination, to listen to my agitation. All the noise that's going on in me is possibly the tiny whispering sound as a response to my prayer, God, please direct my thinking. And step 12 is about principles. Practice these principles in all our affairs. Bill doesn't give us a list of principles, so we have to figure it out. Most of the steps 4 through 9 are helping us reveal to ourselves the principles that we've been transgressing. The darkness comes from our conflict with principles that are universal. Some people call them spiritual, I call them human. Natural principles of reality, like gravity is a natural principle of physics, rigorous honesty. Bill says in chapter 5 how it works. He spends the entire page 58, opening up that chapter, how it works, with the commentary on rigorous honesty daily. The promise is the promise of freedom from addiction, page 84, neutrality. But it's hinted at on pages 84 and 85. There's freedom from unmanageability. We're not cured, and we have a daily reprieve of unmanageability. He doesn't say it that clearly. That's my conclusion. In contrast to addiction, we're talking about the second half of the first step, unmanageability. I am invited to manage my life. Be careful if you say that or ask questions about that in an open meeting. People are very inclined to say, let God manage your life, let God be in the driver's seat. If I had hair, I'd pull it out. Because it's just, I understand the spirit of it, it's just dead wrong. I am responsible to drive my car, not God. Now, God is my GPS. God is my guidance. God is my managing partner. And I sit in the presence of the managing partner every morning asking for guidance and then asking for a rehabilitation when I stumble during the day and am disturbed because I'm out of alignment based on my self-centered needs, which I was unconscious of or conscious of, but couldn't help myself in one sense, but now take full responsibility for. Have you released in terms of the ninth step? Have you released and been released? Have you experienced freedom from this negativity, these resentments, this anger, this fear, this shame? The three feelings, I think, are the basic instincts for survival: fight, flight, and freeze. You've heard me talk about that in the fourth step. And if you haven't, just go to my Way of Life document and see the schema that shows the development from the instincts of fight, flight, and freeze to the emotions of anger, fear, and shame, and to see the underlying cause and condition, the exact nature as our self-centeredness, the root, Bill says. Forgiveness brings freedom. A process, not an event. Ask yourself, where's your life not working? How effective have your efforts been? You've seen these reflection questions before, if you've been with me at all, because they're the same questions to make us conscious. My job partially is to show you what I did and what I experienced, but my primary job, I see, is helping you frame the questions that will unlock the door, that will open the door. These questions asked but unanswered, asked in the milieu, the setting of, the environment of, the set-aside attitude and prayer. Do I believe in the possibility of a life of freedom? I don't mean just addiction. That's the clear promise in the big book. But freedom from unmanageability. You read between the lines, that's what Bill's inviting us to. Freedom from unmanageability. On a daily basis, where our lives are unmanageable. And he says we're powerless to manage on our own power. But read the meditation on page 75 at the end of the fifth step. It's a fabulous paragraph on promises and outcomes of doing the fifth step. And the one line that is my daily meditation at the end of my meditation practice: we walk hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. That's what I mean by God is my managing partner. Partner, hand in hand, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Our relationship with power. So I've mentioned forgiveness and the definition, a decision to release. That decision begins with step 3. That turning from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness is my summary of it. That process from steps 4 through 9. What is your invitation today? What do you want? What do you need? Why are you here? You may have been exposed to my work, maybe even this very workshop in the past, or maybe Fred's work and or workshop in the past. But don't rely on yesterday or the last exposure or experience. What is it that you want, need, and or expect today? It's about a relationship. I'm not spending much time on it. I've reviewed it a little bit in my opening comments. Those first 3 steps are relationship with power. The next 4 steps are relationship with myself. The next 2 steps are relationship with others. And then the key, the best kept secret in the room. Most of the rooms I've met I'm in, that people don't really understand what daily reprieve and not cured means. I believe it refers to unmanageability and that we are invited to manage our lives through the tools of 10, 11, and 12, to be conscious. Keep it really simple. Consciousness is the key word. To the extent that I'm conscious, I will know that I'm disturbed and take responsibility for it. To the extent that I'm conscious, I will ask for guidance and receive an improved understanding and an improved effectiveness. Read the big book. I'm quoting, actually. Growth in understanding and effectiveness in step 11 and then in step 12. It's a very dense and full commentary on that final phase, carrying the message. Be the good news. It's not about what you say, it is about what you do as a model, living according to principles, living with an attitude and a lens through which you look as how can I help? Okay. We walk through an arch to a new freedom. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Bill uses these terms in steps 2 and 3, and then again at the end of step 5. We've walked through the arch. Well, all of the steps are the steps that are the building blocks to the final building blocks in the arch, our way of life. Again, the end game is freedom. Freedom from addiction, but freedom from unmanageability. If we don't stay free of unmanageability, we will be back in our addiction because we know how to deal with disturbance. The anesthesis, the anesthesiology of whatever our addiction is. Step 12 is about awakening. If you read Appendix 2, it's about change. A change in the way we think and feel and behave. It's done to us, that's grace, but not without us. That's our willingness to take action. That's the mystery, and that's the combination. Willingness without action is fantasy, this man said to me. Bill talks about willingness in all of the even steps, naming steps, and it's all about willingness to name and to accept the truth. But all of the odd steps are about a decision and taking action. My decision to take my actions, which indeed is a grace in itself. We're in the bondage of addiction until we're not. We're in the bondage of unmanageability on a daily basis, but we don't have to stay there. We can see that there's no floor, there's no walls, there's no ceiling. There's just pathetic Herbie holding the bars in front of his face. Drop the bars. Release my grip on my victimhood and take full responsibility for my life, for my behavior, for my thoughts, my actions, and my attitude. Steps 8 and 9. Step 8 is just naming the harms. People, many times when I ask them what the harm is, they talk about their behavior. The harms are not my behavior. The harms, the impact of my behavior on other people. How did I reduce their tranquility? How did I reduce the quality of their life through my behavior? And then to make amends has two components. What is it? The invitation for me to change so that I'm not creating this harm. And then how do I clean it up? might change their repair. Who did I diminish? Step 8. Pretty straightforward. With the consciousness and the prayer that we have and the guidance of a sponsor and or a step guide. Step 8 and 9 are the steps that I believe is impossible to do without help. It is possible that you could do steps 1 through 7 on your own. Not as well and not very effectively as my experience, but steps 8 and 9 absolutely needs an objective third person, second person. Who did I diminish? What did I do? You see, the behavior is important, but it's not the harm. What was the impact? The specific impact of my behavior on other people? How did it reduce the quality of their life? And then what specific action? Notice I'm using that word specific, not vague, not general, not poetry. Get down to the actual measurement, if you were a scientist, of the harm done. And if you don't know, ask. And the specific action that is necessary to repair it. And if you don't know, ask. Are you willing? Underneath all of the even steps, Bill says it in the book. Look at step 6 and look at step 8 especially. Willingness. And he started that in step 2 on page 47. He said it's the cornerstone of on the foundation of the arch through we walk to freedom. Willingness. Step 9 is about making the amends. We can't change the history. You know that. I mean, it's common sense. We cannot reverse the impact. But we sit in an attempt at bringing healing. Healing that is a component of our willingness, but we're really hoping for the impact of grace in this process. We describe the harm, and then we ask, because we don't know what the impact is on other people. We can't read their thoughts and their feelings and their history. They have a story about your impact on them. Ask and listen. Don't defend. This is not necessarily a teaching that's complete on steps 8 and 9. It's worthy of much more time. Go to my YouTube recordings. I do separate workshops on step 8 and 9 and separate workshops on forgiveness. We suggest the amends. We don't tell them what we're going to do. We ask them, is this sufficient? Is there anything else that you would like that would be helpful to balance the scale? I'll use the term from Chuck C., a new pair of glasses. One of the wisdom people from back in the 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. To balance the scale of justice. Lady Justice standing there with the scale completely out of balance because of our behavior. How can we balance the scale here? Forgiveness is a process. A decision that starts with step 3 in the 12-step process. Now, it's not a decision to release them in the beginning, but it is the experience when we've finished the 9th step and we look back over our shoulder. And we experience the release that they have experienced, and most of them will tell us that. Thanks for acknowledging it. Thanks for taking care of this. Thanks for the repair of the damage. I really acknowledge the humility and the courage it took. So many words like that you've heard, I've heard, shared in meetings and our own experience. But then the experience that we are released, as the prayer of St. Francis confirms from the 18th century, and the prayer of Jesus from the first century, 2,000 years apart. The same dynamic is expressed because it's the human dynamic. When we release them, we are released. I don't know how that works. I just know that it works, and it's been confirmed through history, both mine and other people's. The document that I referred to in my opening comments, that's in the Way of Life document, is a 3-page, very dense meditation on the forgiveness process, really recapping steps 4 through 9. But it starts off by saying what forgiveness is not. You can see the words. It's not to condone or forget, to approve or excuse. These get in the way of the forgiveness process. No, you're just acknowledging the truth. We're not necessarily reconciling with the people. If that's not our intent, we don't need to reconcile. It's not a decision to retaliate or exact revenge or seek compensation or judge. It's a decision to release them, and eventually an awareness to be released, to release ourselves. Self-forgiveness is one of the focuses that Fred and I did in a workshop, either last time or the time before that. It's so important to know that I need to be released. This process will do that without our intention to do it. It just does it organically. But if in fact it hasn't done it, then we do it intentionally, using that prayer for the removal of deep resentment that I mentioned, pages 66 and 67. Again, one of the best kept secrets in the room. We're not praying for them. That's a wonderful spiritual practice, but it's not the practice recommended in the big book for the removal of deep resentment. Read it carefully. We're praying for ourselves. We're praying for our own healing. We're praying for our own removal of the darkness in ourselves, which I can't do, but I hope that there is a power that will create divine therapy, spiritual surgery, removing the cancer in me. I went back and looked at Fred's work compared to the work of the 12 steps, trying to reconcile the secular with the spiritual. And I see, he has confirmed that it's an accurate description of the process, to name it like we do in step 4, what the hurt was, and to understand it in step 4, what my hope and my expectations were, to really realize my unenforceable rules, the beliefs that I have that are distorted, and then to acknowledge the reality, to be embarrassed by it, of course, and to see that it was all about my attitude, and with humility and courage, to begin to accept the truth of the 4th column, to take full responsibility and accept that this is about my decision and my action. Eventually, the key is action, not thought, not feeling, not discussion. Moving my feet. That's the measure of my action. What am I doing to implement this decision, to repair the damage and to change? That's why it's so important to see in step 9 the 2 components. Number 1, my decision to change, and my effort to implement steps 6 and 7. What's not in the big book, which was the key to unlocking the effectiveness of 6 and 7, was accountability. I pray because I'm powerless. I take action because I'm human, and part of that action is a desire to change and to hold myself accountable for the behavioral change. I can't change my inclination. Sometimes I can't change my behavior. I am powerless over the inclination, clearly. And sometimes I'm powerless over the behavior. And you can see that experientially. But the key for me was, and it's not in the big book or the 12 and 12, in step 6 and 7, was to hold myself accountable, to report transparently and radically honestly to some one person, either daily, weekly, or monthly, what I'm doing, what my behavior is in connection with this effort. And it could be just good psychology. I include good spirituality, but it could just be good psychology to hold yourself accountable to somebody. But what I know is I changed. And what I suspect is I was changed. That grace and that willingness. An experience of being released. A forgiving person has no past. That's the promise of freedom. But an unforgiving person has no future, meaning that we will still be in the bondage of the damage. Is my current life serial suffering? I really, truly haven't suffered for 35 years, 36 years now. Suffered. Oh, I've had pain, but I haven't suffered. That's the difference, because I have an attitude about it that I can take some actions by talking or by praying or by changing my attitude and changing my actions. Do you believe that your life can change? Well, it's a trick question because here you are. I'm preaching to the choir, of course. We enter the world of the spirit, physical sobriety, neutrality, but we're not cured. Ask yourself, these are questions for emotional sobriety. I'm going to bring in Fred here in a minute now.
Hello.
Hello, Fred. How are you?
Nice. No, it's nice to hear you. It's no, I don't hear a lot of folks talking with the, I'm going to say, the clear emotional maturity that it's more important what we do and did than what happened to us. And that concept is so hard for me to get across with people. And there's so much deification of victims in our world that it's, I mean, I'm going to give a talk today after I'm done here on ancestral healing. And my piece is to talk about forgiveness as necessary. But I'm also aware that in my heart of hearts, it's so much more important how we treat people than how either we or our ancestors were treated. Like I don't know how to get past that. And being a psychotherapist, that's not like the most common value. That, you know, they are oriented to helping people who have suffered, and so am I. But in this short life, it seems much more critical what we did than what was done to us. And that seems one of the central orientation points to become more forgiving. Like, I don't mean this with any disrespect. I'm genuinely befuddled sometimes about how I don't hear people say what you say normally. You know, it's like our emotional maturity, I think you refer to as sobriety, but I think of it as a kind of emotional maturity, is in part how you process what has happened to you without having to move ahead blaming the world or feeling victimized. That you make peace, and that's not always easy, but you make peace with actual life, and then as much as you can, you choose to live your life with your principles and ethics, not just as reactions to what happened to you. But that just seems so simple to me.
It's very difficult for people to release because somehow they have the idea that if they release it, that they've condoned it. Or if they release it, the other person gets away with it.
Well, you know, what's interesting about that is the condoning piece is a real challenge. Like, that is a real subtle challenge. And there is a fine line with people, with all of us, between sometimes we forgive out of resignation. I can't do anything about it. Life sucks at times. People suck at times. So I'm just going to release it. It's not a terrible reason, but there are better reasons. Sometimes people do it like the condoning, well, they had a bad childhood themselves, or like they were mistreated themselves, so of course they mistreat other people. But the deeper cleansing comes when you realize that sometimes wrong, bad things happen, and that you have to grieve them, make peace with an imperfect world, struggle with the difficulty of being a human being on an imperfect world, and choose then to move ahead with your own positivity and ethics. That's what real forgiveness is. It involves some piece of it. You might refer to it as spiritual. I might refer to it more as existential. But there's a deep, basic acceptance of life's difficulty, human beings' lack of good treatment, and maybe we're put on this planet in some ways to be tested to see what kind of human beings we are. Like, it's like, I don't know the game, but I know it's not simple. And so I teach forgiveness from like a secular existential space, which is there's a lot of reality that's hard for us to deal with. And that's not easy. And I mean, personally, I think there are multiple levels of coping. So some people wonderfully cope with a faith in God or spirit. That's great. Other people reliably cope with a faith in themselves. I don't value one more than the other. I don't know where they came from. They may all be from God, for all I know. All positive coping through its various channels may have the same source. Like, I don't know. I don't judge that. But you need to have an avenue of positive coping, every single one of us. And we have to have a cosmology where we allow the world to be its difficult self.
Well, and one of the comments I make is reality is. That's all, and it's immutable,
It is.
non-negotiable. It
Most
just
of the
is.
time, that's true.
And most of us take it personally. Reality is not personal.
You know, Herb, I'm going to say that right there, from what I understand, is the hardest thing for human beings is to, well, let me again make it a little less black and white. Um, I think there's both a personal element and an impersonal element to everything. So I don't minimize, and I'm not trying to make what you said wrong. I'm just fleshing it out in a different way. There's a personal aspect to everything. We each have our story. And the story is a really important part of this human experience. It's like fiction. You know, you read Dostoevsky and you are learning a lot by his storytelling and his wisdom and his everything. So the personal is a very important part of this drama, as is listening to the personal in the people around you. So when people get hurt, including us, it's essential to give expression to that personal aspect. What limits us is when we get caught in that personal aspect and lose sight of the impersonal, existential, simply a river flowing. When we lose sight of that, we get handicapped by the personal. Does that contradict your thinking?
No, my thinking is that reality is, and it's independent of me, but my reality is my perception of and reaction to.
Exactly. That would be my take also.
Yeah.
When I teach people like how to deal with life, it's like you can learn about life by reading a novel or by talking to somebody about their life, but that information is going to be limited. It's it's a very narrow perspective on things. You can learn things by reading like academic reports or sociologic treatises and learn that, today 4 million people in the state of California may be having an affair. So that's a deep truth that's probably wiser than just my partner had an affair, but you can learn from both. But if you don't recognize that your partner had an affair, yes, that sucks. But 4 million people had affairs today. So reality is that this is a common human experience and you better learn to deal with it. That's how you blend the two. And the other way that we use this to forgive is every single thing that we are dealing with in human beings has not changed an iota throughout history or space. That the same issues we are struggling with are the exact same issues that people struggled with 2,000 years ago in Antarctica. And you want to be really careful not to exaggerate your place and time so that you again take that too personally. And I have even told people that regarding, let's say, I'm going to say, the lack of emotional self-control of Donald Trump. So I have mentioned to people that, yeah, I do not find his decision making smart, but I'm also aware that throughout human history, people have assumed leadership who have bad abilities to regulate themselves, make good decisions, and put other people first. So it helps one keep things in perspective, that it's personal and current and eternal. You're muted.
One of the comments you made, and I wanted to reinforce it if people didn't hear it, and that is positive coping as an attitude toward reality
That's it.
is the most effective approach to dealing with reality. It's effective. It's not right or wrong. It's just more helpful.
Well, and Herb, I would say that that simple statement is the essence of forgiveness. It's one of the deepest, simple, clear ways to cope with reality. That we are always going to have experiences with reality of being disappointed. And those can be big disappointments, like somebody really harms you, or it can be a minor disappointment, like I had. The reason I was a couple minutes late is I drive my partner into an acupuncture appointment in San Francisco on Saturday mornings, and sometimes I pull over to do what I'm doing with you. But today the city is packed, so I couldn't find a parking place, and I ended up on a street corner in a red zone. I mean, nobody's going to bother me, but for 4 minutes it was like, ooh, where am I going to park? So that's a minor disappointment. Adequate coping is you do the best you can. And it also involves forgiving the fact that, one, there's lots of people in San Francisco today, and two, I could have left 15 minutes earlier. So if I'm just focused on what's outside of me, then how dare all these people take my parking space? But if I focus on my own culpability, it's also, well, you could have left 15 minutes earlier, so you could have found a parking spot. But when you look at forgiveness, you're always looking at the interplay between your own actions, other people's actions, and the way it is. You're always holding all three. And if you just look at other people's actions, you will never have a wide enough lens to see things clearly. Never. But if you look at existential issues too, like let's just say cheating in a relationship, which is one of the most difficult things to deal with. If you look at that, there are only a small number of ways to get out of Dodge when you don't want a relationship anymore. It helps understand a little bit that cheating is one of a short menu. That there are better ways, like speaking honestly, dealing with things in advance so they don't fester, learning self-regulation so you can deal with things you don't like. But not everybody has that emotional maturity, so we end up with cheating and bad behavior. But if you look at the existential piece, which is one, not that many people carry maturity, and two, there aren't a huge number of options. It puts cheating, not takes away the sting, but puts it in an existential sphere. And then the other question is, how did I behave? Was I the kind of partner that made them want to come home to me? Which very few people ask. And when I recognized that things may not have been going as well as I liked, how did I behave? This is not blaming oneself. This is looking through a wide enough lens where things assume a little more wisdom. That there's the behavior of others, there's the way it is, and there's how did I behave.
So that's why I talk about consciousness as the key here. The more conscious I am, the more I'm able to do what you're suggesting.
That's a good way of putting it. As an academic, I try to break things down as maybe a more direct speaker. You might talk to consciousness, but I've noticed over my 30-year career as a professor person, I'm always coming up with categories and alternatives and divisions, and if you don't go here, you go there. It shows why diversity is such a necessary thing, because everybody sees things a little differently. So let me talk about a little different corner of forgiveness while I have you all. I've talked about this before, but not in the last couple of sessions with Herb's folks. The central thing that we recognized about forgiveness was it's in our definition of forgiveness, which is forgiveness is making peace with the word no. And it is really hard to get a handle on forgiveness without this core recognition. You're only forgiving things where you didn't get what you want. When we started our work, we had no idea that this had anything to do with forgiveness, none whatsoever. And it was weird to recognize that we didn't see things as clearly as I could. Our first iteration of definitions was all over the map, because we didn't really know what the terrain was. And then we started to work with groups of people. And we started to listen to story after story after story. So somebody would come in and say their partner had cheated on them. And somebody would come in and say they had a crappy mother who was a drunk. And somebody else would come in and say that their boss favored somebody else. And somebody else would say back in the 90s that they couldn't get a job because they were a black person and they were persecuted against. And somebody else would come in and say they couldn't get a job because they were a white person who was persecuted against. And somebody else would come in and say that it's unfair that I pay too many taxes and we had one complaint after another. It took us about 6 months to recognize that the core issue was people wanted yes to a desire of theirs and got no. And it was only when we were able to collect our thinking into that clarity that we finally became more helpful. Until then, we were lost in the drama and the stories that people told us. So we would get lost in somebody saying, you can't imagine how horrible it was that my husband came home drunk and beat the kids. And of course, it's horrible. I mean, there's no two ways about that. That's a horrible way to treat children. But then the person right next to them would say, that may be horrible, but what's worse is I was beaten as a kid, and it's much harder to get over what happened in the past than it is now. And then somebody else would say, wait a second, that's tough, but at least your mother beat you and you had a relationship with your mom. I was sexually abused by somebody I didn't know. And then somebody else would say, yeah, but that's still in the past. The worst thing was something that happened last week. And we heard all these people battling for their story to be the worst. And that they were orienting their story to make themselves victims, but more than that, to get pity for what had happened to them rather than creating resilience. So let me say that again because it's so central. We listen to people creating drama and stories about what happened to them to make themselves get pity for what happened to them rather than looking to recover and be resilient in response to what happened to them. And the reason they could do this was because they kept on telling themselves what happened was wrong. And they kept on shouting, this is wrong. It shouldn't have happened this way. Somebody made a mistake. And I'm going to call 1-800, you made a mistake until the day I die. Even if the person answering 1-800 is sorry, nobody gives a shit. They would call and argue and complain and ask for a refund and say, you need to change the game because this didn't turn out the way I thought it should. And then we finally grasped, and this was, after working with so many groups, that the central issue is I wanted yes, and I got no. And I will be damned if I'm going to forgive that. That's what we understood as the heart of all this. And so we then made a cognitive shift that our work was to help people make peace with no. And our work wasn't to condone the no or excuse the no. And I don't mean anything more than it was to make peace with the no, because the essence of forgiveness is to be at peace with your life. That is simple, clear, direct, and actionable. The goal of which forgiveness has so much power, and the reason it's so part of every religious tradition is because it is designed for you to be at peace with your life which is at the heart of all the religious traditions which teach you to be at peace. To be at peace is the goal of forgiveness. From a secular point of view, it's to be at peace with your life. Warts and all, good and bad and all, sucky and great and all, to be at peace with the whole enchilada. What we do, unfortunately, and it's sad, is we minimize the good, we maximize the bad, and then we spend our life saying the bad was wrong and shouldn't have happened, as if we're in control of the game. And it is such a waste of human potential. It is a very, very, very sad waste of human potential. Is to be 50 years of age and still saying at some level, I got the wrong mother. Besides it being an idiotic statement, like one of the stupidest things that anybody can say, like somehow I got the wrong mother. How the hell would I know if I got the right or wrong mother? I simply didn't get the mother I wanted. And then I turned, and this is Herb even mentioned, the unenforceable rules. I turned that not getting what I want into violating an unenforceable rule, and then I'm a prisoner. I'm now a prisoner of this made-up unenforceable rule, and I am trapped. Because you can say legitimately, I didn't get what I want and I don't like that. That's a legitimate statement of fact. I didn't get the mother I wished I had. I didn't get the partner I wished I had. I didn't get the job I wished I had. I didn't get the height that I wished I had because I want to play basketball. That is absolutely legitimate and is one of the normal, healthy difficulties of this human life. There are things we get that are not what we want, and there is nothing wrong with acknowledging it and trying to change it. So if you don't like your height and you want to go on the rack for a few months, go ahead. You know, it may not be worth it, but that's your choice. But when we take not getting what we want and not liking it and turning it into a rule that it shouldn't have happened that way, then we put ourselves in prison. And the prison is those rules, not what happened. What happened is never a prison, it's just what happened.
Yeah.
But the rules we make around it are the prison bars. And then you can tell how imprisoned you are by how much you repeat over and over, it's wrong, it shouldn't have happened, they shouldn't have behaved that way, I should have done this, I should have done that. And that's just make-believe. It's like kids playing patty cake, or, you know, it's a game. And it's a very normal human game because almost none of us want the vulnerability. We don't want to live in the vulnerability that there are simply some yeses we won't get, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Right.
We don't want to admit that that piece of truth about life is absolutely inviolate. There are certain things that we simply can't get a yes to, no matter how much we piss, moan, and complain. And so many of us choose to piss, moan, and complain rather than accepting. And like, when I first started doing this years ago, one of the things that I would do as a kind of reinforcement was listen to the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want. I took that as one of the forgiveness theme songs. You can't always get what you want. And at the essence of everything I've been trying to do for 30 years is to get people to make peace with that simple statement. You can't always get what you want. And to remind people that, and this is the other side of it, if you spend more time appreciating what you have and less time arguing with what you don't have, you will be a far happier person. So the unenforceable rules, and this is their real damage, is they make us spend such helpless energy fighting what is that we don't have enough energy left over to appreciate what is. We've wasted our precious psychic energy. So instead of arguing for 25 years that I got the wrong mom, we'd be a hell of a lot smarter trying to look at those 25 years and think, where did at least people try to be nice to me? Because what we forget, and it's a very painful forgetting, and this is probably part of Herb's reality training, nobody owes us anything except maybe our parents when we're 0 to 18. Other than that, no human being owes us anything. And that's tough. And because we think they owe us, we spend so much time fighting that we can't say thank you for all the ways that people are kind to us. And what we recognized after we started articulating that, you can't always get what you want, and the essence of this is making peace with no, well, why don't you spend more time looking for where you've gotten yes? I mean, again, this seems duh to me, but I've been talking like this for 30 years, but it's quite helpful and simple. So let me do a guided imagery, which I know I've done for this group before, but it's so central to the point that I'm trying to make with this practice. So if you'd all please, and many of you have heard me before, I always do an imagery practice because you have to build this into your body. It's not just intellectual. So if you put your phones far enough away that they're not going to distract you, please. And like make a place where you can sit comfortably for 5 minutes. And then please close your eyes. And close your eyes and allow your attention to come inward. And simply bring your attention inward. Try to relax your abdomen. Try to relax your shoulders so you can sit comfortably. And it's really helpful to consciously relax your shoulders. To not hold tension in your shoulders, to not keep your shoulders tight and elevated. It's really, really helpful to relax them consciously. And then it's really helpful to relax your abdominal muscles so your breathing can quiet and deepen. Really helpful to take slow, deep, gentle breaths. And then just bring an image to your mind of someone you really love. Bring an image to your mind of someone you really love. And bring a loving, warm, gentle, generous image of love to your mind's eye. And see if you can, like, feel that love in, like, your heart area, your heart center, as you sit. Like, just bring love into your consciousness and see if you can feel it. And then all I want you to do is ask yourself a very simple question. Like, during the day, do I bring enough of my attention to love and the people I love to live an optimal life? Like, do I focus enough on love? Do I remember love? Do I honor the people that I love and love me? Am I doing enough to optimize my happiness or well-being? And then whatever answer you get, note it, take a breath or two, and very gently allow your eyes to open. And then just bring yourself back to present and just, just stop for a second. And the thing that we saw, we started very early in our forgiveness work, teaching positivity and gratitude and love, because we realized that in some ways it's easier to raise the yes part than it is quickly to go after the no's. So, like, many of us have been badly hurt in life, and we've created patterns of unenforceable rules and victim stories where our brains go quickly to those stories and trap us. And working that through, is not the easiest thing. But one of the things that we can always do immediately is find yes, is look out the window and appreciate a sunset, or remember love, or walk into your kitchen and recognize how abundant you are having food in the refrigerator. And therefore, you create more yes experiences, which after a while make it easier to handle the no's. Like they become, like the no's are not quite so insistent. And we create a better perspective around the no's, which is essential. It's essential. Because as Herb and I started an hour ago, life contains no. It's how much of your life do you want to fight the no's, argue with the no's, dominate your thinking around the no's, create a sense of yourself as a victim of the no's. That part we have some choice about. We may not have had all choice around the no's that have happened to us. In particular, if we were 7 years old, we didn't have a lot of choice around that. But we have so much choice now as to where we bring our attention and how much we teach ourselves to not just look for no, but look for yes too. So one of the practices that makes forgiveness so much more obvious is, can you remind yourself, like every single day, to at least say thank you to 2 or 3 people for doing something nice for you? That's a really simple forgiveness practice. Because if you start saying yes to when somebody makes you dinner, if you say thank you, or if somebody listens to you complain and you say thank you, or if somebody excuses your behavioral stupidity and you say thank you, all of a sudden, like yes and no have a different relationship. I don't live, I'm not just dominated by what I didn't get and my argument. I'm teaching myself, and this is the other piece, and I'm going to say, so much of what I do now is just maybe a little different way than Herb does, but I tell people that the whole purpose is to see life clearly. That it contained one hell of a lot more beauty and blessing than you paid attention to. One hell of a lot more. And that you have a lot more agency in dealing with the stuff that wasn't so pretty. And you've probably accomplished more in that regard than you give yourself credit for if you'd pay attention. And so I'm constantly, as my thinking evolves and I try to simplify it more and more, I find myself reminding people to see things clearly. That one, shit happens is absolutely true. But 2, beauty happens a lot too. And if you're not careful, you spend too much time arguing with the shit to see the beauty. And then the problem comes when you blame whoever it is that gave you the shit for the fact that you don't see beauty anymore. That's the essential problem of unforgiveness. You might blame mom from 1996 for the fact that you don't see beauty in 2025, which is about as ridiculous a statement as exists. I've had people blaming dead mom. I mean, I've had to control my laughter at times. It's mom's fault that I'm unhappy, even though I'm 44 years old. It's like, what could be a more self-destructive statement? Or it's my ex-husband from 9 years ago. That's why I'm a bitch. It's like, who are you kidding? You're a bitch because you're still blaming mom and your ex-husband, not because of what they did. I mean, you may be a bitch anyway, but at least the blame makes it more obvious. I mean, you just may be a bitch. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, you're not a bitch because of what mom or ex did. You're a bitch because you're blaming them now for your inability to find a happy path through life. And that's the essential self-defeating nature of unforgiveness. And as I've said every time I've talked in front of this group, this doesn't mean that you don't need time to grieve your wounds. That is as essential as every other part of this path. You don't go from hurt to healed immediately. And if you put that kind of pressure on yourself to go from hurt or healed immediately, you are going to cause a lot of suffering for yourself. It is required to grieve. And grieving means that I suffer when I'm hurt, or when I'm mistreated, or when I fail, or when things don't go the way I want. You are supposed to hurt. Partly we hurt to cultivate sympathy and empathy for the human condition, because hurt's everywhere. And if you suppress your feelings or get only angry, you're going to have a hard time being help to others. But we also hurt because our nervous system needs reorganization. We need to accommodate new information. And we need to adapt to a world where we got no and wanted yes, and that takes time. And grief is the process of adaptation that takes time, of adapting to reality. And unforgiveness is the resistance to reality, but it's necessary to get to reality. You can't go from A to Z without the steps. So unless there's something wrong with you, if somebody important to you really mistreats you, you don't go to okay in 2 days. But you also don't need 5 years. No, I'm serious. And for really serious injuries, it can take a year or two, but it doesn't take 10. And after a year, you can start moving out of victim status as you work towards forgiveness. But the essential point that I am trying to make is there is no way out of real injury without some suffering, because we are being confronted with our limitations of control and our vulnerability. And that is no easy task to work through. Forgiveness is the full resolution of the grieving, suffering, blaming process. There's nothing wrong with the process. Unforgiveness is simply being stuck in that process. There's nothing wrong with blaming mom every now and then. No, I mean that. Like, if you had a really crappy mom, it makes sense every now and then to say, shit, if I'd had a better mom, I wouldn't have had to struggle with all this crap. That's truth. But it doesn't mean mom ruins your life. She just gave you conditions that are harder to deal with. And you don't ignore that. But it's not the centerpiece of your story. And mom is not responsible for you now trying to learn to deal with it. But mom may have made your life harder. You don't wish away difficult things. But forgiveness means that, yeah, mom made my life harder. That's just true. Maybe somebody else was born with diabetes. It's like there are truths. And they had to struggle to cope with that. And I have to struggle to cope with the fact that I had a bad mom. Or maybe if you're all in recovery, I had to struggle with the fact that my body and nervous system didn't do well with alcohol or drugs. Some do, some don't. There's a lot of preconditions that we have to forgive, but we have to fully embrace and accept that they're true before we can release them. But it doesn't mean like you make believe that they didn't happen or they didn't make it harder. Of course they did. But moving ahead, and ultimately, and this is where I need to stop, ultimately forgiveness involves changing your story from one of a victim who's angry or full of self-pity to someone who can accurately talk about your life, including the ways that you have handled things that were difficult. So in shorthand, we talk about the evolution from victim to hero. But a hero is not somebody who had an easy time of it or that they weren't badly treated. And the hero's story includes the suffering. It's like, yeah, I had a really awful marriage to this person. And they were terrible. And they were lost in drugs and everything. And so for 5 years, I had a terrible time. And then I walked out and I didn't know how to deal with it. So I screwed up another 5 years. But now I'm free. And that's the hero story. But it doesn't paint a kumbaya life. There's no denial in it. There's like truth and acceptance. And again, there's the last thing I'll say is that wonderful aphorism on forgiveness. Forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. Like that is, if there's one thing you want to remember about forgiveness, that's it. Anyway, Herb, I got another call coming in about 10 minutes. It's always nice to see you and share our pretty aligned perspectives.
Thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much, Fred, for your time. And we have scheduled another one in a couple months. And so there'll be a flyer for a continuation of this conversation.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
In the big book, there's a story in the discussion, not the story area, but I think it's on page, somewhere around page 40, where Fred, the CPA, the accountant, and he talks about the strange mental blank spot. Many of us in this very conversation talked about that. We can't see it until we see it. We're smart, we're educated, we're well-intentioned, we make an effort. Eventually, grace and willingness, that is the act of the Spirit, and my actions connect to an experience where it is revealed to us. That strange mental blank spot. Number one. Number two, Dr. Berger has just a great phrase, and it may be his, or he may have stolen it from somebody, but he calls this emotional maturity, this emotional sobriety comes about when we hold our center of gravity deep inside ourselves. We don't place our center of gravity in people or circumstances or events outside of ourselves. We keep our center of gravity deep inside ourselves. I'm reminded of my experience with the third and fourth column is I felt like a puppet on strings. I had tied the strings to people, circumstances, and events. I didn't know I did that in order to get value and or validation from other people about who I am, etc. In terms of my low self-worth, I was compensating for it by attempting to get worth from outside of me. Well, the third and fourth column began to help me cut those strings so that I could place my center of gravity deep inside myself, my own sense of my self-worth. And again, Fred used the word existential. I think that's what we're talking about. This practical living in the present moment, living in the now. All right, let's see. We're good to go. We'll be back in a couple months. It's scheduled. It's probably on the flyer. You'll get flyers that announce it, and the conversation will be continued. I think I know I have some slides that we didn't look at, but I wanted to go to it. Oh yeah, just what we talked about with Paul. My feet determine my freedom through my attitude and my actions. That is just so practical. You want to be free? Take actions. How free do you want to be and how soon? Those are my questions to a lot of people. How free do you want to be and how soon? Your decision to release. No, there it is. All right, this is the last cartoon I showed about freedom, and I made my comments there. But this is the truth. We want to release the bars in front of ourselves to have a joy of living. Our head in the clouds, our feet on the ground. Please join me in this adaptation of the 7-step prayer. I made reference to 6 and 7 regularly in today's conversation. This is a process of change, steps 6 and 7. You want to change? Identify what you want to change. Pray specifically for the change, and then talk to somebody on a regular basis, transparently, about how you're doing. You will change, or you'll stop praying or reporting. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, healthy and unhealthy. I pray that you now remove from me all inclinations and behaviors that stand in the way of my usefulness to you and my helpfulness to others. Grant me knowledge and wisdom, strength and power, courage and humility as I go out from here, intending to do your will by trying to be in alignment with reality as it really is. Amen. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful balance of the weekend.